Hello and welcome back to Worst Church Ever. I am Chris.
And I'm Nathan.
And we're two lifelong friends navigating the intersections of the secular and sacred in this space every Monday, and all the days between in the course of our daily lives as husbands, fathers, and followers of Jesus, rejecting fundamentalism and exploring cycles of trauma and healing in the redemptive stories of Scripture and in the reflections of the sacred all around us.
So grab some baked goods and a cup of coffee, because it's time for a discussion at Worst Church Ever. Add your thoughts and comments online, and don't forget to subscribe so we can keep the conversation going. You got the Castle Grayskull behind you now.
Oh, yeah.
That's new.
Ish. New old, yeah. My neighbor is like our parents' age, and I'd posted something on Facebook, like a meme from like the Zennials group, and it was talking about, Castle Grayskull and all the He-Man figures. I think you shared one about this is like your 35th anniversary of not getting the G.I. Joe aircraft carrier, right? So it was similar to that. So she comments and she's like, Chris, I have a ton of He-Man stuff from my son, and you can come by and have it. And I was like, get out, And then a couple of days went by, and she comes to my front door and she rings the bell, and my wife comes down, and my neighbor has 3 boxes full of 80s toys, most of which are Masters of the Universe. And she says to my wife, I'm sorry, I know exactly what I'm doing, as she hands her the boxes. So then when I got home, I started going through them, and it was heavenly. Because it was like all this stuff that I had as a kid that I lost, or that like I sold at yard sales because I was like too cool, too old.
Yeah.
And I'd never had Grayskull, and now I have 2. There were 2 Grayskulls in this box.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So do you have them all like on a shelf, all lined up?
Yes. Our house is an old farmhouse, and so there's a coal room in the front where they used to deliver the coal through a window in the top, and would go into this coal room, and that's where the furnace was. So the coal room has some built-in shelving. So I set all the heroes of Eternia up on the top shelf, and then the villains of Snake Mountain are on the next one. And they're definitely posed like in a story. So I may shift where I record to that room, in which case, because there's more to see, or maybe I'll just have to just like show you sometime.
A cameo.
Yeah.
A cameo of Castle Grayskull. Do you have any characters that you really just were excited about refinding?
Yeah. So I went through, and every single one I'm pulling out, I was like, man, maybe she bought this from me at the yard sale like 35 years ago. But so I'm going through and I'm finding all these guys that I was pumped about, and I found regular He-Man, original He-Man, and original Skeletor. But I had the battle armor skeleton,
which was so cool.
Yeah,
like that's the one where you hit it and then it dents, and then you hit it again, and
it gets worse. Yep. So I'm going through, and there's battles that finally I found battle damage Skeletor, but no He-Man. So I'm moving stuff, and then there it is at the bottom. I pull one more figure out, and it's him. And I actually said like, "Glory be," or whatever I said. I was like, "Hallelujah! It's the one." So yeah, I was really pumped.
I loved my Masters of the Universe figures, and my favorite character was Moss Man. One day I was playing very hard in the backyard, and my dad had collected this big pile of moss from the garden and just kind of piled it up, getting ready to throw it out. And I thought, well, that's great. It's kind of good camo. So I hid Moss Man inside the moss, and then I could never find him again. And that's the end of the story.
That's a sad story.
And it was like 15 minutes later, and no one was over there working. It was just Moss Man really did look like moss, and we just never found him.
He did his job too well.
Somewhere in Allentown, Pennsylvania, there's probably like if somebody digs in a hole in the ground, they're going to run into this He-Man action figure, which no longer probably looks like Moss Man. I'm sure the plastic or whatever the moss, like the color was probably deteriorated. That's like, what is this?
Yeah.
All the paint came off, so it's just this random figure that no longer looks like Moss Man. They had some great characters though, like Stinkor.
Oh yeah, yeah. Any of them that smelled were good. A couple of them shot water. Some of them punched.
What's the one that you could like spin him and he would like spin around?
Oh,
something like
he was like a cyclone guy.
Yeah. I don't think he really made a very big splash in the animated series.
Cyclos.
Yeah, something like that. But he was cool because you could spin him. I don't think that I ever saw an episode that had him in it. and
Right.
yet the action figure was pretty cool. So it's like some of
Oh,
those,
yeah.
some of those, you're like, oh, there's a tie-in to a episode that hasn't occurred, or it was like a one-time cameo just so they could produce
Right.
the character.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody wants Prince Adam.
Although I do have him now.
With the purple pants
But
and
yeah.
the like the
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
the,
The white
t-shirt.
shirt, the tight white shirt. Yeah.
Um,
And
so have you heard the YouTube version of What's Up by Four Non-Blondes where He-Man sings?
no,
It
I have
was
not.
it was back when there was very limited things on the internet. Like YouTube had like 17 videos on it. One of them
Yeah.
was probably the Charlie Bit My Finger. And the other one was He-Man singing What's Up by Four Non-Blondes. And it's a real treat.
When you first saw it, Nathan, were you like, "This is what the internet is for"?
Yes, that's exactly right. It's maybe the perfect video.
I love that.
So.
So if you go back on Spotify and you look at the numbered episodes, 1 through 19, are following the story of the family of Abraham in Genesis. And so we just got to Genesis 27 with our most recent episode in that format. And that is the story of Jacob stealing the blessing from Esau, or at least that's how it's traditionally interpreted. We see all these different things in Genesis. We've talked about Isaac living in his mother's tent, and not only what that symbolizes, but also, if it's true that he did that, what it actually says about his mentality and his trauma response. So there's many repeated motifs like that throughout the first 27 chapters of Genesis. And so the most recent one in chapter 19 we looked at is this business of the birthright and the blessing going to Jacob rather than Esau, who, for all intents and purposes, should have received it. So that's kind of where we pick up. All right. So we're going to share some context. We're going to read the story, and now we're going to talk about what's really going on in the text, or what might be going on in the text. This is from the New Revised Standard Version, Updated Edition. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called his elder son Esau and said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." He said, "See, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me. Then prepare for me savory food such as I like, and bring it to me to eat so that I may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah, we should say Rebekah is Isaac's wife. She's the mother of these twins, Esau and Jacob. Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game for his father, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me game and prepare for me savory food to eat, that I may bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my word as I command you. Go to the flock and get me 2 choice kids, so that I may prepare from them savory food for your father, such as he likes. And you shall take it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies.' But Jacob said to his mother Rebekah, 'Look, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a man of smooth skin. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him, and bring a curse on myself and not a blessing.' His mother said to him, 'Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my word, and go get them for me.' So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of her elder son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. And she put the skins of the kids on his hands and on the smooth parts of his neck. Then she handed the savory food and the bread that she had prepared to her son Jacob. He went to his father and said, 'My father.' And he said, 'Here I am. Who are you, my son?' Jacob said to his father, 'I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, so that you may bless me.' But Isaac said to his son, 'How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?' He answered, 'Because the Lord your God granted me success.' Then Isaac said to Jacob, 'Come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not.' So Jacob went up to his father Isaac, who felt him and said, 'The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau.' He did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. He said, "Are you really my son Esau?" He answered, "I am." Then he said, "Bring it to me that I may eat of my son's game and bless you." So he brought it to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." So he came near and kissed him, and smelled the smell of his garments, and blessed him, and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of his father, his brother Esau came in from his hunting. He also prepared savory food and brought it for his father. And he said to his father, "Let my father sit up and eat of his son's game, so that you may bless me." His father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" He answered, "I am your firstborn, Esau." Then Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and blessed he shall be." When Esau heard his father's words, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me also, father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing." Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and look, now he has taken away my blessing." Then he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Isaac answered Esau, "I have already made him your lord, and I have given him all his brothers as servants, and with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Have you only one blessing, father? Bless me also, father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then his father Isaac answered him, "See, away from the fatness of the earth shall your home be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother, but when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck." Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him, and Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." But the words of the elder son, Esau, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran and stay with him a while, until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger against you turns away, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I am weary of my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women such as these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me?" That's the end of the chapter. That's basically the whole story of this pivotal scene. So, what is going on here, right? We can talk about the general contours of the story, but my question is Isaac actually fooled? Are we convinced that Isaac actually thinks he's blessing the right son versus the wrong son? So I don't know, Nathan, where do you want to start? How does the story hit you? What stands out?
That's a good question, Chris. So I do think that there's enough in that story that kind of leads me to believe that Isaac might have been more aware of what was going on than not.
Yeah, a lot of people that look at this in a scholarly way think that you're meant to take away from this idea that Isaac was blameless in this and had no guile and no trickery and that he was fooled. But there are some who say, look how many times Isaac asks these questions, and look how specific he is about these questions. And it seems as if he's really trying to figure it out and maybe has figured it out. And then the question becomes for me, for the sake of the conversation, let's assume that Isaac is not fooled, even though his eyes are dim and he can't see. We don't have the sense that his mind is dim,
Right.
and he's trusting his other senses. So let's, for the sake of argument, say that he wanted to give the blessing to Jacob and not to Esau. And the way I look at that is not that he favored Jacob, because we see throughout 26 and Genesis 27, Esau is clearly Isaac's favorite. So it's
Right.
not that he wants to take something away from Esau. I think what he wants to do is protect Esau. I think if there's anything he's taking away from Esau, it's taking away the pain and the burden of being the one who carries the blessing of the covenant, because Isaac himself grew up in that situation as the heir apparent, as the one to take on the blessing. And I can't think that a day goes by that Isaac doesn't think about the time his dad bound him to an altar and almost sacrificed him, right? I mean,
that's trauma.
Yeah, exactly. So my whole take on this was, well, if Esau is really the favorite, and he clearly is, I think he wants to spare, Isaac wants to spare Esau from a life of pain and trouble and hardship that he knows is coming.
I think he might be conflicted too, because I think, earlier you talked about how Isaac's looking at Esau almost as this picture of Ishmael in his head. And I think there is a little bit of trying to right a wrong that had been done. Like, he watched this pageant play out in front of him, and he knows that it wasn't correct, that Ishmael's cast out of the family. And there's this idea that here's this son of mine that sort of embodies the spirit of Ishmael, and it would be nice to put things back together. And yet, if you go back to the beginning of the Jacob and Esau story, we've clearly got a mandate from Jehovah saying the older will serve the young. Like, it's pretty clear that that's not how it's going to go, even from the earlier parts. Maybe that's foreshadowing, but I think it's also, there was some sort of understanding that Rebekah and Isaac had that this was actually how it was going to play out in the end.
The text says that this prophecy came to Rebekah. It's not clear that Isaac also heard it but you have to imagine Rebekah would have told him,
yeah, I can't imagine she'd hide that from him.
Right. Especially given the fact that he is the one that's going to have to be doing these actions of blessing, But you raise a good point that the prophecy was clear, at least to Rebekah. You have to assume that she told Isaac and that she'd be the one sort of trying to turn Isaac's head in that direction. And Jacob is clearly her favorite, just as Esau is his favorite. So the portrait of Isaac as a conflicted father, I think, is a really strong and compelling one.
Yeah. I guess the other side of it might also be, did Esau even want that life? And I think you said that before. Like, it wasn't just the spiritual application, which I think that's more of what the birthright was, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
But now we've got sort of the family business.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get too personal with you, because I do not want to put you on the spot and make you decide your family's future here. But like, your dad's got a family business that you have been involved with quite a bit.
Sure.
Is that what you wanted for your life? Is that what you want for your life?
That's a good question. And also, just going back for a sec, the difference between the birthright and the blessing, it's kind of hard to tease out, because in a sense, the birthright is the blessings of the firstborn, let's say, which would include the material stuff that makes up Isaac's earthly enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
But the family business of this family is not that. The family business is actually, as you're alluding to, the perpetuation of the covenant. So what we would call business, the means of production, the capital, that's tied up in the birthright. The blessing and the covenant, which is really the family business, the family interest, the whole point of this following this family in these stories, that's through the blessing. So it's an interesting kind of parallel or not parallel, or reversal of the way we normally think. But yeah, it's a good question. My family, we have a business, but we also, we're in church all the time. And there's a degree to which sometimes I feel like church is the family business, not that it's my business or whatever, but that sort of there's an enterprise of being pastoral or of serving the larger community through the auspices of a church, or at least in the name of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
That's in a way part of my inheritance too. And your family was the same. But I will say, in terms of inheriting family businesses, family enterprises, I think every situation is different. For me, I think it was something that I was dissuaded from on purpose by my dad and my mom and my grandfather, because they wanted me to do other things, and I had other things that I wanted to do too. But at the same time, it's, it was a source of a lot of blessing, and so we didn't want to just kind of throw it away. So
Yeah.
it's actually enabled me to have the flexibility to do more of the blessing stuff and to be able to do the business stuff. So for me, it's worked out because, as a pastor, and most pastors that are coming out of seminary now, I mean, I graduated 20 years ago, but even now is even more so, you have to have some other means of income as a pastor for the most part, unless you're in a mega church or something like that, or unless you're in some sort of institutional setting that's really, really strong. It's hard to find full-time pastoral jobs, especially in settings that are not super conservative and super exclusionary. So in the mainline tradition, many of us are part-time pastors and we have to have other means of income. So in the Bible, in the New Testament, Paul, his business was making tents, right? Which is interesting because the motifs here are a lot about dwelling in tents here in the story of Jacob. But so for me, I've been able to tent make, if you will, with my family business, and also see that business be prosperous and be blessed. And so for me, Nathan, it's a no and a yes. It's like don't be in this business, but you do need to come back every weekend from college, in the fall and help. So it's kind of like it's messy. It's whatever. But it's worked out. It's worked out. And family business is always messy. Working with family is not easy, especially at least in my experience, it can be hard. Fathers and sons, not to make that a gender thing, but fathers and sons can be hard because sometimes you're just like your dad, and in other instances you're so opposite, and you could be just like your dad one second and so opposite the next, and then there's tension and there's conflict, and you're having flashbacks to your family conflict, but now you're doing it in front of customers and employees, and that's hard, man. That's hard. You got to watch that. Yeah. So that didn't quite answer your question, but I think I kind of got there in a roundabout way.
Yeah, and I guess I just look at Esau, the man of the fields. He's hunting. He's not a shepherd.
Right.
Did he even want that?
So what's interesting is that, because we don't have all the details, anytime we come to a text, we are bringing an interpretive lens and we are filling in details. So you and I did it just a bit ago, and we said, doesn't say Rebecca told Isaac the prophecy, but we have to think that she did, right? We're always bringing in interpretive tools and trying to fill in things based on reason and logic and common sense and our own experience. Well, the early commentators on this text, the rabbis who wrote what they call the Midrash, the commentaries on the Hebrew texts, many of which became part of the Talmud and stuff, they do the same thing. They fill in all kinds of blanks, and they go so far as to say, Esau was wicked and evil, and that's evidenced by the fact that he wanted nothing to do with the settled life of the tents where the religious training and the spiritual centering happens. All he ever wanted to do was be out in the fields. And so there's some not so subtle callbacks also to Cain and Abel there, right? Like Cain's the one out killing and everything or whatever. Or at least he kills Abel, right? So there's this motif of whatever, killing and being kind of wild, and it's some coded stuff here. But all of this stuff in the Midrash and the Talmud is very, very presumptuous. And we can't make the moral judgment, Esau bad, Jacob good. But you can see why people invested in lionizing Jacob would make those arguments. At the same time, it is perfectly reasonable to think that Esau would much rather be a hands-on guy out in the field doing his hunter thing than having to administer this growing family and all of the spiritual aspects of it. Now, the danger of that is to do what some of the rabbis did, which was to say the worldly and the hands-on and the dirtiness of Esau is by definition not spiritual, and the groundedness and civilized nature of Jacob is by definition spiritual because he has time to study Torah and he has time to meditate. I would reject that out of hand, as I'm sure you would. That's the danger in trying to figure out these guys' motivations. But as long as we say that up front, then I think we're okay to try to make some sense of this story. Would I rather sit at a desk and administer this thing, or would I rather be outside? I'd rather be outside.
I think that is probably not too far off from Western thinking as well, because we enjoy the enlightened, logical, rational thoughts of education and all those things, and to look at it through that lens, Jacob then becomes the one that we want to look to as the righteous one, because he's the one that chooses the quiet life of sitting in the tents and not the one that's out there. But I think there's plenty of people that make the argument that there's something very spiritual about the world. There's plenty of verses in the Bible that talk about the beauty of the world and how God presents in nature and has made himself known in nature. And so I think that there's something very narrow about thinking about one being more spiritually appropriate than the other. And so, I don't see anything. I think the only thing that we can potentially look at, which again is still a loose thread, is the marrying of a Canaanite woman.
Yeah.
But it's not like there's anybody else around.
Mom, I looked around and I swear, you get what you can get, right? Like,
it's either that or my sisters, which in that day and age might have been tolerated, but there's not many pickings here for a wife.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's really important. Chapter 26 ends with Esau married a Hittite woman that brought sorrow and bitterness to Rebekah. Chapter 27 ends with that same thing. This Hittite woman is bringing all kinds of exasperation to Rebekah and Isaac. And so sometimes some of the rabbinical commentators would also say, evidence of Esau's wickedness is that he married a Hittite. He married somebody from outside of the covenant or outside of the family, which, by the way, is why Rebekah, at the end of chapter 27, sends Jacob to her brother in Haran, because at least there you can draw from some good stock, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely racism here, xenophobia, yeah. And there's this haughtiness about the covenant, like it's only for us. But you see at every turn, people are added to the covenant that don't come from this family, from this stock, from the Hebrew people there, and they become people who are vindicators and deliverers of Israel, and they become part of the genealogy of Jesus.
That's right.
Many.
That's right.
So
yeah. I want to take a step back here and just for a moment and think about the lens by which the early people would have told these stories to each other.
Yeah.
This is not necessarily in the scripture, so to speak. This is me extrapolating some thoughts here. So obviously the people in Genesis were not writing these stories down as they were happening. This was not 20th century news where they're like, we're going to be featured in the Bible here. Let's take some notes. These are oral stories that are being taught and told to each other. I imagine that they're being conversed over campfires.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought is probably the first iteration of that was likely in the Sinai desert. That's just my imagination going in work here. This family ends up in Egypt, and then many generations pass, and then they have to come back to the promised land. So while they're wandering around, they're talking about these stories over and over and over again over campfires and teaching them to their children. And I just wonder if part of what's going on here, not just in this story, but in some other stories that you've already alluded to, is there's a family here, a rather large family that's set to take over the land that they once thought was theirs, or what that once was theirs. They're going back to their homeland, so to speak. And in that time, there's been many generations of people who have actually started to live there that aren't them, that are now going to be displaced. And so what I need to do is I need to tell these stories around a campfire as we prepare for genocide, for lack of a better word. I need to make sure that the camp that I'm in understands how bad these people are. So the Edomites, who are at least in the scriptures, part of the lineage of Esau, I need to understand where they came from and how they're related to us, but also why it's our right to then potentially go in and displace those people. I need to look at some of these other stories that I have, and you went back in the Lot story earlier, and which is fascinating story, that his daughters end up being impregnated by him. The offspring of those characters are parts of the ones that are inhabiting this land here. So I don't think that these stories are necessarily trying to rationalize it's okay to be impregnated by your father. Like, I don't think that's the point, like that we're trying to get away from this. But if you think about the people that are telling these stories to each other, is it possible that they're saying like, hey, we're about to go there. These are the people we're going to invade. And here's some things that we need to know about them. Like, they're the kind of people that sleep with their fathers. They're the kind of people that marry Hittites. They're the kind of people that like give up their birthright for a bowl of stew. And we're in our rights to take that back, so to speak. So I don't know if that's necessarily what's going on, but I do think that in a literary perspective, like we have stories and we have different things that we tell ourselves to sort of rationalize behaviors. And I wonder if that's part of what these stories were originally intended to do, was just to help the people understand exactly what they were up against in a moment.
Well, it's really fascinating because we don't even know if the genocide in Canaan really happened.
Right.
But if we take the text at some level of face value, it makes perfect sense that you would be encamped in the shadow of Mount Sinai, and that you'd be recounting these stories, you know. And the other thing that's really interesting is when these stories finally come into a written form, because like you said, Nathan, this is oral tradition for a long time. A lot of scholars think that they come into written form and the written form takes precedence over the oral tradition when the Hebrew Israelite intelligentsia are exiled to Babylon. So it sets up later in Israel's history, like in the 8th century BC, it sets up a tension when the folks who were exiled, their offspring, their families are returning to Israel. And they are now interacting with their relatives, many of whom were actually never banished. And so there becomes a competition in the primacy of stories from those two traditions. So you see Moses is the important story. Moses is more connected to the people who never left. Jacob is, and the covenant, and that's more important for the ones who are coming back because they were cut off from the land, right? And the people who were never dispossessed that second time by Babylon have a different relationship to the promised land. The people coming back from Babylon are coming back a second time. It's the second Exodus. And so they need to connect in other ways. Or maybe I have that reverse, but you know what I'm trying to say.
It's a repeated motif.
Yeah.
We're coming back from Babylon. This is not new. This is something that's happened before over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
And we are people who are constantly displaced and then able to regain our footing, so to speak.
Right, exactly. And so you have that as a really important element here. And so when these traditions back in Israel post-exile start to then really finally solidify, you do seem to have some competing narratives in terms of which cycles of stories are really prominent. Is it the revelation of the name Yahweh to Moses, or is it the covenant with Abraham? And different parties have different reasons for championing both. Maybe not even in any explicit conscious way, but subconsciously as they're telling their story, they're drawing from these different things. And that goes again back to sibling rivalry. So even within Israel, you have rivalry between North and South. You have rivalry between the people who were displaced into Babylon and came back, and the people who never left or who were never made to leave, and who has better claims to the land and to the holy sites, and by the way, to the definition of what it means to become a Jew or to be a good Jew in that context. Because it's post-exile that we start getting terminology of Jewish versus just Israel or Israelite or Hebrew. Yeah.
Who's exiled into Babylon and who's left? I am imagining the people that are exiled are the intellectual ruling class elite, and the people who are left are the peasants, because you don't pick up a bunch of peasants and exile them to Babylon.
That's not a good strategy for empire building.
Right. I want to take the nobles, the elite, the royal family, I want to bring them over to somewhere else. And so the descendants of those people are sort of the aristocracy of Judah and of Israel. Right. And the ones that are left are probably more of the working class. And so now there's also a class war that's going on in addition to the sibling rivalry that you were mentioning before. So there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff there.
That's really a good point. And it actually goes right back to this story, and it goes back to Isaac and Ishmael as well. You know, the intelligentsia, the ruling class, the men of letters would have been the Jacobs, and the people who were left behind to basically, you know, eke out an existence would have been like the Esau's. You know, they didn't have the time to develop some of those, to write down the Torah, for example.
That's right.
So
That's right.
yeah. And so there's inner Jewish conflict, you know, and that happens in every society, obviously. But it's fascinating to think about how that may have played out when it comes to the final formation of the Hebrew canon, for example.
Yeah,
you know, like Esau says, "What about me, Father? Isn't there a blessing for me also?" Well, when you're writing the Torah and you're putting together the whole canon of Hebrew Scripture, what about this tradition? What about this important moment? What about this patriarch or matriarch? And I think it's really amazing what makes its way in. And whether you want to be a person who thinks the Holy Spirit is guiding that whole process in a really hands-on way, or the holiness comes from the humanness of the fact that all these traumas bleed right into the story. And so even now, 4,000 years, 3,000 years, 2,000 years later, we can relate to them. That's holy. That, to me, that's the definition of holy. So
that reaction that Esau has is spot on. Like, I can't imagine. Well, first of all, we don't live in that world where my dad would like bless my brother and not me. But like, I can imagine if my brother somehow usurped my blessing, whatever that means. I can imagine being like, "Dad, what about me?"
You would say those exact words, yeah.
You hear those details in there. It's hard not to say, like, there had to be some nugget of like truth to this, because that's how people react to each other. Is they say, "Wait, Dad, what about me?
What about me?" Yeah.
I have maybe two thoughts. The first one is, my brother and I, my little brother, by the way, I want to say that. So I'm like the Esau in this, and my brother would be the Jacob character here. He's great. We're on really good terms. If we were younger, I think it would be really difficult to make that leap of misunderstanding who's who, because when we were younger, you know, my voice got deep before his. But here's what happened. The other day, he left a message for me on the phone, and I listened to it, and I thought it was myself leaving myself a message. So I do want to put a little defense in there. Some siblings do sound quite a bit like each other. Like, so there was this moment where I was thinking about Isaac and giving him a little grace, because we do sound a lot alike.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, so now what you have to do is get with your brother and decide who's going to go full dad, you know, as he...
Maybe I'll have him record something, and then we'll play it on this, and we'll see if you can distinguish which one's me and which one's my brother.
That would be fun, but I'd rather have your dad do it, and if he gets it wrong, the other brother gets everything.
Yeah, there you go. No, that either one of us want to play that game. And Dad, if you're listening, sorry.
What? Gee, Nathan, having this story fresh in mind, why would you not?
Because I'm the older brother.
Bro.
Because I'm a man of the field.
That's right. Plus, you have an older sister who's really first in line, right?
That's true. That's true in this day and age. We're just fighting for the scraps after my sister, who really is the intelligentsia. She's a professor, and she has her doctorate and all this other stuff. And me and Steven went into the Army, and I fought my way through college. I eventually did pretty well, but I'd have to say she's probably the elite of us three. I'm kind of in the middle. Oh goodness, that's funny. So I think, did Isaac know? I'm thinking yes at this point in time. I'm going to say yes. I think he probably was party to it. I don't know that he was profoundly responsible for it. But here's another question. Do you think that Isaac might have allowed this to happen the way it did so that he could just point his finger at his wife and son, so he didn't have to be the one to actually tell Esau?
That's a really good question. If they're not in cahoots from the beginning, right, then it's either he figured it out and didn't tell her and let the chips fall where they may because he doesn't want to face the music with Esau, or, and this is a generous read, maybe maybe Jacob needed to have a parent and Esau needed to have a parent. That, I don't know. It's interesting that Rebecca says, I'm going to send you to my brother Laban. Why should I lose you and your brother in one day? She knows that she's dead to Esau, and Esau's dead to her, I guess, at this point. So it could be, it's like the Parent Trap, right? Where one parent takes one kid and one parent takes the other. That's a generous way of reading it, but the other way of reading it is, if Isaac in fact knew and doesn't let on to anybody, he's just happy to let Rebecca and Jacob take the heat, which, by the way, they deserve, I guess. I mean, Isaac gets a rare win here in that sense. So if he is doing this just to be able to cast blame on them, I don't want to say that he's justified in that, but they are playing a very dangerous game, and they are dishonoring him, disrespecting him. They're really victimizing him. In modern terms, we would call this elder abuse.
Yeah, no doubt.
And we've seen that with celebrities who are older, far advanced in years, about to die, and they're manipulated by people who come in and, center their lives around themselves and everything. So, and it's also blasphemy, if you want to think about it in purely sort of Old Testament religious terms. My son, how did you find this game so quickly? Oh, your God Yahweh did it. Like, so Jacob and Rebecca are playing a dangerous game, I guess you could say. And there's all kinds of arguments for, okay, well, this is an upending of patriarchy because it's the woman who's deciding. And I get all those motifs, and there's a lot of good research and commentary about all of that. But just this act itself is marred by its immorality, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it if we wanted to be exceedingly kind, we could say it's passive aggressive, and it's really truly immoral, right? So yeah. I think the passive aggressive one would be, a spouse feeling like the other spouse isn't playing fairly, right? We know that it's supposed to be Jacob, and so since you're not going to honor that, I'm going to just go ahead and get my way anyway, right? I'll just do something manipulative in the background. So that's maybe the passive aggressive side of Rebecca in that story. But I think you're right. It's probably more profoundly elder abuse and immorality at its core.
And we don't want to, I'm just hearing the feminist critique in my head. Like, we don't want to downplay the importance of something written in this time period, giving a woman that much agency. That's really important. And that happens throughout the Hebrew scripture. I know it's so easy to point at the scriptures and point at the patriarchy and everything, and it's obviously, but the more careful read consistently shows that women and people who are not of the nation of Israel, so let's call them immigrants, refugees, whatever you want to call them, slaves, people from the lower classes, they are constantly put in positions of agency in these scriptures in ways that are very subversive, so subversive that you miss them. And so we have to say that too. That's important in this text. That's
a really good point. So I'm not going to backstep what I just said, because I still think it's elder abuse and it's passive aggressive. However,
how could it not be?
But given the time frame and the agency that women had at that point in time, it's still amazing.
Yeah.
And it was right, given the prophecy that had been given. So the means were not necessarily upstanding, but the actual upholding what was, in this case, true, saying, Isaac, you really need to honor this promise, probably would have been the more straightforward way to do it.
It also brings up for me this question, and we get into this a lot with people who want answers to like the theodicy questions, like why does evil persist? Why do bad things happen? We could avoid this whole scenario if God had just made Jacob pop out first, right? So why didn't that happen? And to me, I don't have an answer for that, but to me, it gets back to this idea that for whatever reason, God chooses to co-labor with people. And God doesn't just make it so. God chooses instead to let nature take its course and then to be part of the story in other ways. God's not coercive, and God wants to work with us even in the messiness of our weird families and our sibling rivalries and our weird issues with our parents. I think that comes through in the text too, because you do have to ask the question, okay, if this is the God that Genesis says created like the world, he can surely make Israel. I mean, he can surely make Jacob the first out of the womb, but he doesn't. And
Yeah.
I think it actually raises that good question of why do things happen the way they do? And when they happen in ways that are messy and not how we would have them happen, where is God in that mix?
So when you said that, it really just brought me back to the motif of Sarah and Abraham and how there was another promise given to him of a son who happened to be Isaac. And there was a little impatience going on that led to Ishmael, right? Because Sarah having an autonomous decision, I think it's maybe a similar situation where she's looking at this promise and saying it was given and yet it's not happening. I'm getting older. We need to figure this out. So, you know, maybe this is the way. And it clearly wasn't, but I think it's that same idea that there's this like co-laboring and trusting that things are going to happen, taking things into account. And inevitably, even though the Ishmael story kind of goes south a little bit, the fact that God still blesses him, right?
Yeah.
And says, hey, I know that you're the product of a misunderstanding, and yet like, you're not wrong. It's not wrong that you're here.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's really well put.
You know, this story where we're leaving off, Esau, like he's got murder on his mind. He's like, the second dad drops dead, you're done. Which is interesting because Esau knows he's got to know he's the favorite. He's got to know Isaac loves him. So he's still honoring his dad in a sense, going like, Dad made this choice. I'm not going to let him die thinking that his favorite son betrayed him.
Ooh, because his other son did betray him, and I'm not going to be like Jacob.
But the minute that guy dies,
yeah,
I'm coming for you. And he says it out loud too, not just he doesn't just say it in his head. He says it to someone, because otherwise Rebecca wouldn't have known about it. So it's like, it's not an internal monologue that we're getting.
No, that is spoken into the universe for sure. And it reminds me also of The Godfather, because that's exactly what happens with Michael Corleone. As soon as Mama dies, Fredo bites it. You know,
what a sad scene.
Yeah.
Have you seen the parody video that was on YouTube a couple of years ago about that?
No.
It's really funny. I'm gonna have to send it to you. It's like Ode to Fredo, I think.
Oh jeez.
It was. I can't do it justice by singing it, but it had this little song. I was like, I'm smart, I can do things.
Not like people say. Oh, Fredo.
But that's exactly right. Like, you know, there is sort of this deference that Esau's giving to Isaac and saying, like, I don't agree with this. I'm absolutely livid, and yet I'm not going to betray you by doing this. I am going to betray you.
But he's not going to betray his dad.
Well, I am going to betray your dad, just not while you're alive to see it.
Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah. That's right.
I plan to betray you.
Yep.
Just not this. I'm going to wait so you don't actually know about it.
Yeah.
I'm going to protect you from the knowledge that your new favorite son has just been killed by. Well, you told me I was going to live by the sword, so
that's true. Yeah. Yep.
I was reading a little bit of commentary, and I do not know that I have any like information to give you on where these resources came from, because I can tell you it's from Professor Google. But there were a few people that were talking about how they see Esau's legacy in different places, like the Roman Empire and the Alexander the Great, Russia, and all these other like superpowers, and they kind of have this thematic element that when you see Alexander the Great, it's actually like Esau's spirit. And when you see like the Roman conquest, it's the spirit of Esau in the world.
Interesting.
I don't know that they were necessarily drawing a direct genealogical line from Esau to these other places, but the idea that the spirit of Esau living by the sword and being this conquering guy, like that's where you see it. You see it in these different superpowers that are erupting. So I wonder where they would see the United States.
Ooh, that's a great question. no comment.
That's not necessarily a fair critique of the United States, because I think that there's certainly moments where the United States embodies the spirit of Jacob, and there's moments where we embody the spirit of Esau in that way. And I think that that's probably true for individuals or different cultures. There's times when you embody more of that philosophical learning elitism, and sometimes where it's that wildness and the like live by the sword, die by the sword. So I think any culture, any people probably have moments where they can go to both extremes. So before we wrap up, Chris, what's been going on? What are you reading? What are you into? What are you kind of thinking about outside of the biblical narratives?
I watched last night the Timothy Chalamet SNL. It was a rerun from a couple of weeks ago. It was very good. He's very talented.
So I saw a couple of those clips. I did not watch the whole thing, but I plan to.
I just read 3 out of a 4-issue run of Batman teaming up with Santa Claus. So check that out. It's called Batman and Santa Claus Silent Night, KNIGHT. The whole Justice League is eventually in it. Everybody's in it. It's awesome. It's awesome. It's really good. But speaking of comic books, my wife texted me yesterday and she said, "Hey, such and such a day coming up next week. Are you cool if I take our middle child to this bookstore that we go to a lot? The guy who writes the I Am books, like I Am Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I Am, whoever, he's gonna be signing autographs." I was like, "Yeah, that's fine, go for it, And then she sends me the details. I'm like, "Wait, Brad Meltzer is the guy who writes the I Am books?" And she's like, "Yeah, I thought you knew that." And I was like, "No, you should have said Brad Meltzer, because then I would have come along too and get him to sign some comics or something, So she plays it off like, "Oh yeah, I knew that he was a comic book." No, you didn't. Yeah. So my wife's gonna go meet Brad Meltzer, and because she's excited about him signing her RBG book, and I'm like, I have all these comics he could sign. She's like, "I don't know if he's doing those."
Yeah, you always have that risk where you show up at an event where like he's signing for the I Am books, and he's like, no, I'm not doing that. That's not. That's not for this. Oh man, you're like, "Oh, I have one of those too. I just, you're here anyway."
Yeah, right. Pass him a $5 under the table, like, "Brad Meltzer needs your $5.
Yeah, I'm sure he's doing just fine.
Through that same bookstore during the pandemic, we met the Wimpy Kid author.
Oh yeah.
Why am I blanking on his name? I've read all of his books.
Oh my gosh, it's not Dave Pilkey, because he's the other one.
He's the other guy. Yeah, Jeff Kinney. Is it Jeff Kinney?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Kinney.
Yeah. It's not Greg Heffley. That's the character.
That's the other one.
But so we met him in this. It was during the pandemic. It was close to Christmas. It was a massive outdoor drive-through signing event, where he had the mask on and everything, but he would sign your book, and then he would throw snowballs at your car. It was really cool.
I've been reading, actually not reading, I've been listening to Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
And I tried to read it about a year ago. I'm not sure if you remember me telling you that I had to put it down, because I'd read a page and then I'd have to go back and reread it, because at that point in my life, I was so incredibly sleep deprived. I know all the words on this page and they're beautiful, and I just really enjoyed reading that page because it just flowed so well, but I have no idea what just happened. And so I've been listening to it. Cormac McCarthy is infamous for not using a lot of punctuation. So when he writes, you don't know when people are talking or not talking for the quotation marks and that. He just kind of writes it all out without that, which, again, I think that's probably a trend that doesn't make it into many publishers, because it's super confusing. Yeah. But listening to it in audiobook, that's not an issue, because the guy's doing the voices and all that, so it's really easy to figure out what's dialogue and what's not. That's much easier on the ears. It's like poetry in motion. Just every sentence is just so beautifully strung together. So Blood Meridian, incredibly violent, incredibly blood-ridden, and I don't know that I can put that as a strong recommendation for anyone that doesn't have a high tolerance for like Quentin Tarantino stuff. Right? So if you love Quentin Tarantino, you probably love Blood Meridian. If you don't love Quentin Tarantino, just don't bother.
The clue is in the name.
Blood. Yeah, but I've been enjoying that. So I don't think they're going to make a film adaptation or a comic adaptation of that particular book. But
Yeah.
Brad would be the one to do it. I'm just kidding. Could you imagine? I am Blood Meridian.
DC Comics and the state of Cormac McCarthy bring you an epic new twist by Brad Meltzer.
And it's like it's got to be the like the kid graphic too. It can't be like super bloody. It's got to be like those.
Yeah,
It's got to be the ones that are in the I
like
Am
Teen
books.
Titans Go. Like
Yeah. Blood Meridian, but in the style of Teen Titans Go. That's probably the only thing that would make it past the censors.
And it would.
Oh man.
Have you seen Teen Titans Go to the movies?
I haven't. It came out and we planned to go see it, but I think my in-laws were thinking about taking the kids to it, and it just didn't work out, and then it just kind of lost its way, and we never got around to it. I heard it's pretty good though.
It's great, and I will tell you, Michael Bolton is in it. He's like a singing bear or something, but I will tell you that the movie ends with Dick Grayson Robin saying, "Bye, kids. Thanks for watching our movie. Ask your parents where babies come from." That's how it ends.
So maybe I'll be watching that with Elle on our own. No, just kidding. No, my kids at this point in time, except for Alex, know where babies come from. So
He probably still remembers where babies come from.
Yeah,
Alex.
It's like, oh,
it's just there.
the trauma of birth. We already we talked about that recently.
Yep.
So
Yep.
oh gosh.
Nathan, I was gonna say real quick, don't forget to ask the people because you're good at this. Like and subscribe, right?
I don't have to. You just did.
I stole your thunder.
That's all right. That's all right. In the comments section, why don't you tell us if you think Isaac is part of the conspiracy, or if he was simply just being manipulated and abused by his family members? I think that's a good discussion topic.
Or if he conspired on his own against them, knowing that they don't know that he knows. So the rare win for Isaac. Yeah.
Three options. Was he complicit? Was he tricked? Or was he complicit but not in the way that we think?
Yeah.
Complicit but also passive aggressively so.
Yeah. Good.
Oh gosh. That's good. Hey man, well hopefully I'll see you next week.
Yeah. Are you getting the snow, or is that just down here more?
I saw a great note, and I don't know how it is around you with the weather forecast, but it was from New Hampshire. It said, this weekend, we're getting either 0 or 85 inches of snow. It will be either the worst storm of the century or a completely beautiful weekend. So either enjoy or get everything off the shelf at the grocery store because the Armageddon's here. Like,
get the bread,
it's
get
like
the milk. Yep.
Yeah. So it's going to be one or the other. It's going to either be the Snowpocalypse 2024 or it's going to be 65 degrees.
Nice.
That's right. Hey, man, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for spending an hour with me.
Likewise.
Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. See you soon.